Hey Dom.
Hey, Jenna.
We're not quite harmonizing because that was separately.
Did you ever try that? I think it's on TikTok. They have that
I've seen that thing where like you
do
sing
re
and then you
mi,
did it. No,
do
okay,
re
so
mi
here's the
fa
thing.
so.
Not all black girls can sing. I'm just gonna end it there. No, I have not. Like, I don't even want to hear myself do that, let alone anybody else.
I know my limitations, but it is fun
Exactly.
watching it. It's fun watching. You know what it is? It also is a little. Some of it can also be a little much when I see like professional singers who are like doing it. I'm like, stop rubbing in my face. I know you can sing.
Oh, you're so talented.
Exactly.
All right. Let's start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award-winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. So, remember when we were just like, we're not going to talk about the depressing stuff in journalism anymore. We're going to talk about other headlines. And then it's just like, no, bitch, we're going to have like more sad stuff happen. More people are
It's
going to lose their jobs.
uh yes, but also, I mean, I guess right now what we're focusing on, one of the top stories that we're looking at right
Mhm.
now, was the North Carolina, the situation in North Carolina,
That
correct?
is so, oh my God. So, the stories that I'm hearing coming out of that. Um, but I guess my big thing is aside from the absolute horrific just experience that people who are in the area, and by the way, I mean, listen, it's no means the exact same thing. But going into this, part of the whole thing was that, like Asheville and places like that were, because they're up in, a higher elevation, it's hilly, etc. They were supposed to be one of the places that would be quote unquote immune to climate change. And living in the Hudson Valley for myself, I also kind like it just sort of really reinforced how like nowhere is safe from these kind of catastrophes. So and when it wasn't, I think it was, oh, no, it was Tropical Storm Irene that came through upstate New York and absolutely devastated with just rain, and rivers flooded and roads were washed out. And so and that was just to get a taste of what these people are going through. I can't even begin to imagine. My
Never
heart
can I.
absolutely goes
Yep.
out to, well, I shouldn't say more importantly, but one of the things that stands out to me is the role that local news is playing, because
Yeah.
people are turning to their local news for any kind of information, and that's who would be giving it.
And Brian Stelter of CNN wrote a really good piece where he looked at a radio station, News Radio 570 at WWNC.
Okay.
And he wrote about how, in the wake of Hurricane Helene, they were one of the stations that was a vital resource for the communities there. They were dispelling misinformation. They were also helping connect people to their loved ones. They did marathon shifts, making sure that they were getting information out there. And of course, that's probably to the people who were able to get that information. We know that there are people who were cut off completely from Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
I mean, the only
No
thing that
power for days.
a lot of the stuff I was seeing was on TikTok, and it was just really incredible. Some of the images and what people were going through, but I mean, that's why I like when you see the power of local news for those who are able to connect on there. The fact that they were able to pull it together and get information to people and try to, help people out. That's the power of what local journalism can do. It's part of a community. So, of course, kudos for them for doing that. And I know it's a terrible
Hats off to those
situation.
journalists, because I'm sure that it's a unique thing when, and this is for all first responders, when your home, your family is in just the same amount of chaos as
Yep.
everybody else, and yet still showing up to work to try to disseminate as much helpful information to the community as possible. Um, yeah, I mean, I it shouldn't take a natural disaster, but unfortunately, the way things seem to work in this country, it's probably going to have to take a few more disasters for people to fully grasp. And I'm not talking about the public either. I'm talking about, like the powers that be, the people who own local newspapers, etc., to fully grasp the vital role that they are playing in communities.
And I'm sure, you've also, Jenna, right? You've been parts of stories, where you have a natural disaster or there's some kind of tragedy that happens. You've gone out in those stories. I think it's also the emotional toll it plays on the journalists who are doing
Oh, it
these.
completely plays an emotional toll. I mean, I remember, like, again, um when Hurricane Irene happened, so let's see, my god, there was so much flooding in this area. Like, I remember walking around after the waters had receded and just taking pictures, and there was, like, at least a 4 to 5 foot high in some areas mud line on the trees from that's just how high the water got. And again, this is a hilly area. Um, so yeah, anyway, so that was really, but then, hearing initially right afterwards, people, were on Twitter and they were saying, it's absolutely criminal that the news media isn't here. And, where are people to help us and tell our stories? It it does take a minute to, first of all, mobilize to figure out how to even get reporters to places, because you, of course, like, do you want to call people and get their testimonial, of course, but then you're also trying to be mindful of, like, if you don't have a way to charge your phone, I don't want to eat up your entire battery here, which you might need for emergencies. But then, like, to get people physically out there to, like, get those pictures to whatever. And this is another place where citizen journalism does play an excellent role, because you're there. I mean, the only other thing that comes to mind right now in terms of recently was that massive snowstorm that hit Buffalo. um
Yeah.
it was, and that story, that horrible story about the young woman
Yeah.
who froze to death in her car, but it was everyday people in Buffalo who were showing what was happening, how the city was just completely paralyzed, and, like, there was just epic amounts of snow. um yeah, that just, it is taxing, when you get up and go out to go cover something, and like I said, you leave your own home and your own family in some sort of peril, but you still manage, not manage, I don't want to say, but you still show up to try to talk with other people, sometimes who are going through the same thing you are. And, I'll be honest, like, there's been some stories where we stop recording and I end up boohooing with the source because it's traumatizing.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. We're all humans in the end, and I think that part of, a lot of the journalists who are covering the story, that's the thing is they want to be there to help and tell the story. They
Absolutely.
want to document that. They want to be able to get the right information out there because they know that's what you do. That's the job. So again, kudos to them for the reporting they're doing, but also, like we said before, thoughts and prayers to the people who out there are living in this tragedy, and
I
hopefully
cannot imagine. I
it's not
we
going to be easy
Yeah, had
getting out of it.
one ice storm come through my area and it knocked out power for a couple of days, and that was in February. And as you know, I have been on this eternal journey to figure out how to get the right kind of
Hmm.
generator in my house, because I've been shook ever since then. It's just, you the modern world, you can't exist without power, and that alone is terrifying. And then there's washed out roads, there's no food, there's no fresh water. Like, I mean, your water pump doesn't work, like, you can't, it's just, it's bad, it's really, really bad. And god, I hope those people get the proper relief and support that they're going to need going forward.
Agreed. Okay. Um, we're on to our next headline. So now this is a little different for us,
Okay.
and I think it connects pretty much to our interview that we have for today. Um, so this story is about Chappell Roan, who is
Oh, Miss Chappell's back, or did she ever leave? Has she gotten her? Has someone collected that poor young woman together yet?
I, you know what? I adore
That
Chappell.
sounds like
I
no.
adore, I adore Chappell. I do. So, giving, I guess, people a little bit of context here. So, Chappell Roan, in case you don't know, she's a 26-year-old musician. She's been around for a few years, actually, but she kind of blew up on the scene probably earlier this year, like in January or so. A lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of her music is just perfect for sing-alongs at these large music events.
Mhm.
So Chappell is she grew up in the Midwest. She
Missouri, if I'm not
identif-
mistaken.
and she identifies as lesbian. And she's very vocal. Like, she's been on social media for a long time. She's very vocal about where she stands on issues. Very progressive. She talks a lot about, of course, various LGBTQIA plus topics, especially talking about trans rights.
What did she
And
do now?
well, what happened was, I guess,
Oh God.
yes, what
So what
happened
had
was,
happened was with Chappell.
so first, maybe I believe like a month or two ago, she released a video where she was talking about the issue of people just coming up and to her and just, kind of invading her space to take photographs. That kind of and I honestly, I totally get that. I think that's really, she is like, I didn't get into this to become quote unquote famous. She did this because she loves the art and what she's doing. And this is her project. And she puts her passion into this work. And she didn't come here for the fame, and she likes to do this. All right.
No, I get the SNL joke now of like, this is the project. I didn't get that part.
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, yes.
continue.
Oh, yes. It's all about the project. So she then, a couple of weeks ago, if she came out and well, there was an article that was published, and in it, you know, she kind of alluded to the fact that they must have asked her about her politics, like who she was planning to vote
Oh
for in
wait,
the
this is
election.
the Kamala Harris. Both sides are equally terrible, and
Correct.
okay.
Correct. So initially, that was the comment she made in the newspaper was something about both sides being problematic. She, of course, well, in case people don't know, she champions also the pro-Palestinian movement, and so she is very vocal about that too. And she has issues with the Democratic Party, as
A
well as, of
lot of
course.
people do. That's not a headline.
But I think what happened then was that fans and other people started questioning, is Chappell going to be voting Republican? Like, is she? And then so she felt a need days later to come out and post a video,
Okay.
frustrated, of course,
Okay.
saying,
Oh my
hey,
God.
listen, I didn't say that. I didn't say I was voting Republican. She was like, I'm just saying I was critical of the Democratic Party. Um, she kind of put that video out there, I think, thinking that was going to answer people's questions. It didn't. So
How
then
does
the
this
next
young
day,
woman not have any media training at this point? At this point, how is there not some sort of PR person in there who, like, if Jesus won't take the wheel, a PR professional has to?
so a little fast forward a day after that, she comes out. I'm going to respond to that. She comes out and says, fine. She's like, she doesn't want to, she's like, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. She did mispronounce her first name, that was like, oh no. And then she also, but she still didn't say she was endorsing her because, again, of the issues she has with the government on trans, with Dems
But
on
there's still
transition.
even better ways to be able to communicate that. What I'm getting
Correct.
stuck on is that listen, it sounds like she's a great artist. Like you said, she makes music that's really great for like big stadium event and all this other stuff. But the lack of communication skills, especially mass communicating, that's what I keep hearing over and over and over again, is that there is no one who has taught her how to do this, or when it's perfectly acceptable to just be like, no comment and let it go.
I think, and what ended up happening is she canceled. There was an event that was supposed to happen. Uh, it was a music festival here in New York, and she canceled on it because this took a large toll on her. And I'm going to
Because
say
she
that
hasn't been warned or anything. Like, I'm not saying that like having the world come at you would not take. I believe that would take a large toll on you, but I just, yeah, I'm stunned that there isn't anyone there who is helping her navigate it. Because what I get the sense of is she is attempting to navigate this media firestorm solo. And that's what's amazing to me.
I think, for me though, what I take from it is I think she's an artist who really is so connected to her audience and feels the need to speak directly and without like a PR perspective. And
But
I
that's what's
appreciate that.
created
But
this mess.
I know that's
She
where I
needs
do think
help. There's nothing wrong. Like you
I agree.
communicate. Oh my God. You can
But
have an intimate relationship with your audience and still have help to communicate. Because I'm sorry, communicating to people one on one or even in a small group is not the same thing as communicating to a mass audience. Those are two different communication styles.
I agree. I do think that that would be helpful so that it helps also her mental health, that she's not
Yes.
wasting her time, having these constant discussions and going on and feel like you have to keep explaining yourself because I do. I feel for her because I really do think like she's again, do I have an issue with what she's saying and how she's phrasing it? I do. But I think that she's coming from a place of someone who is really trying to I think she's just like you said, I just don't think she has the training. And I think that unfortunately it is taking a toll on her. So we'll see what happens. She's supposed to have a festival this upcoming weekend of October 6th. And then I think the next week. And we'll see if that happens. And it's taking place in Austin, Texas. But
I mean, I do hope that she can get back on track, but more importantly, if she's going to
mhm.
remain a public figure, um, then understanding how to do, mass communication. I'm sorry, that's just part of the job. That's just it is. If you like it, don't like it, I understand that, but you have to have some sense of how to handle
Yeah,
communicating with the media and then to an
agree.
audience.
Uh, reason I brought this up because it's the perfect kind of story that we both said this. This is the kind of story that MTV News in its heyday would have covered and, really deep dived into it. So kind of is a great segue into our next guest.
If you're a person of a certain age, maybe Gen X, does this sound familiar to you? That's a clip from the opening intro to the iconic MTV News program, The Week in Rock, which then was hosted by Kurt Loder. The show debuted in 1987, and from that point on, it was a staple of my youth. I didn't really watch that much network news back then. It was still sort of getting its thing together. And so MTV News was for me, network news was for my parents. So from the late 80s through the 90s, a lot of news that I got was reported by journalists who looked and sounded a lot like me, or at least close to my generation. Now, of course, MTV being a music channel, the show featured interviews with some of my favorite music artists, like the then rising Seattle grunge band called Nirvana or the political New York hip hop group Public Enemy. They also broke news on the death of the musician Kurt Cobain, who was the lead singer for Nirvana, and Pedro Zamora, a cast member from the MTV reality show The Real World, which of course set the stage for a lot of the reality we see today. Pedro passed away from AIDS. MTV News didn't shy away from harder news topics such as racism, LGBTQ plus rights, presidential elections, and even a war.
The MTV News unit may have shut down in 2023, but the impact it had on youth culture will be felt for generations to come. Today, we're excited to have one of the driving forces behind the early MTV News era joining us. Michael Alex was a segment producer for The Week in Rock, and he produced pieces for the Peabody Award-winning Choose or Lose campaign. He was also the founder and leader of MTV News digital organization from 1994 to 2007. He's here to talk about those formative years, the impact of MTV News, and the importance of preserving journalistic history in the digital age. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
So, Mike, if you don't, I wanted to start off with how you got started at MTV. And I'm going to say, like, I being somebody in my 20s back then, when the Week in Rock was around, I would be envious of anybody who had an opportunity to work at MTV News because it was where you wanted to be. And how did you find your way to MTV News back then?
Well, I was a freelance television producer making all different kinds of television, GE commercials, financial documents for investment firms, videotapes for hospitals. And I'm at the production company one day, and the business development person walks up to me and says, I want you to meet my friend, Linda Corradina. She's the news director at MTV. Michael is an excellent producer and a real rock and roller. That's how I get introduced. Linda hands me a card and says, call me. At this time, I'm 3 months from my 30th birthday. So if you're 29, this kind of means you're dead. Your life is over. Youth is done. And I'm thinking, I don't care about anything. I just have an invite to go to MTV. I'm going to check this out. Went, interviewed, was very impressed with what I heard. Met with the number 2 at the department, a gentleman named Dave Cerolnik. And I was excited about how they approached things, about how they thought about news, about how they thought about the audience, about how they thought, stylistically and in terms of production. And I decided that I was going to work for them, even though they hadn't offered me anything yet. I would work for them for 6 weeks because that would be enough to get the rock and roll out of my system. What a great time that would be. And I did get hired and they did start me and I stayed for 18 years.
Wow, 18 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that first of all, in the current landscape now, that alone is just like, wow, you started at 18. You had to stay somewhere for 18 years.
I mean, the experience wasn't like being at some old company where you get the gold watch at the end of 20 or anything. It was a topsy-turvy, exciting, uncertain space. But I stayed because if you're a music fan and all of a sudden, for real, you can make $400 a day making a videotape for Merrill Lynch or $225 for interviewing David Bowie. These are real things that happen to me. You start making new choices about your life. Income is less important than, I want to live the life I want to live. I want to be the interface between an artist that people care about and their fans. I loved making television, and at MTV, you could do things you couldn't do anywhere else. It was a special place at a special time. The management, the leadership was outstanding. It was really being a kid in a sandbox. If you're a music fan and a television producer, that was the only place to be.
Okay, I can't even fathom that. Although, again, having just voraciously taken in this stuff as a kid, sure. I can imagine it's one of the things that attracted me to broadcasting. But just for people who, like myself, who just have no idea, can you give us an idea of what maybe a day or a week was like working in the Week in Rock? Like, are there traditional journalism things like the morning meeting, going over the stories? What are we following? What are we following up with? Was it that kind of a vibe, or was it?
Well, I mean, so the head of the department, Linda Corradina, and her number 2, Dave Cerolnik, were both from CNN. If I got this correct, Dave was definitely from CNN. Linda may have been at ABC. They came from news and wanted to do something new. There was a 10 o'clock morning news meeting led by the managing editor, a gentleman named Michael Schor. We talked about what was going on. Some of what's going on is coming from record labels. Some of what's going on is, word on the street. Some of it is just being in touch. And the plan for the day would be set out. I, in those days, was less a part of the daily news. What's the news of the day coverage? I was a feature producer. Go meet this band on the road. Go meet this band in the studio. Go where something special's happening. Conduct an interview. Shoot videotape. Produce a 2 or 3 minute package, which would then air in daily news and then in the Week in Rock. When you watch the Week in Rock, there would be 6 features in that show. I also neglected to mention earlier, someone who I grew up with, Kurt Loder. I mean, I grew up reading Circus magazine and then Rolling Stone magazine. And you walk in and Kurt's there. And Kurt is great. And Kurt is in person exactly how he is in print and exactly how he is on air if you watch the show. This is a wonderful place to be. You've got a music journalist mentor with a real pedigree, a real talent. And then he's doing it right in front of you. It was inspiring. It just elevated everyone there to go for their own best.
One other thing that I'm wondering also is about this kind of collaborative, creative work. Because again, with, the changing nature of the business and everything, a lot more journalists are finding themselves either working independently or they're just become, like content creators. And they're also, but to have that collaboration, to have like a Kurt Loder there, but then to also have somebody else to bounce these ideas to really get the most out of the stories that you were covering. What was that like?
Well, it was there's a back and forth. Let me take you through what my process would have been. I'm told you're going to interview a brand new band. No one's ever heard of them before. They're coming from England. They're called the Pixies. I immediately hate them because the name is so silly. So I then meet with the department researcher who gives me their independent record, the fresh pressing of their first album, some press clips, and some videotape. I go home and I study and I listen and you prepare. You come back in, you have a huddle with the show producer who may or may not have an idea of what he or she wants. Then you go and you do this. You come back, you write a script, you review the script. It may or may not work. You may get feedback. They may love it. A lot of the work was, I'd have to say, impressionist. As long as you ticked off the who, what, when, where, and why. Other things that you might do, fun and irreverence were valued things. Not stupidity, not flippancy, but there was definitely room for doing things you would not see anywhere else in a conventional news broadcast. You'd put that script together, you'd edit it, and as you know, in television, you've got someone who's going to record the voiceover, and that may be edited. Kurt Loder's going to edit what he says. You've got a videotape editor. So it's teamwork. There were no one-man bands. There were no predators in those days. It took crews or two-man crews. Television in 1989 took a few people to make. It's not what it is today, where things are automated and a person can shoot, produce, audio, record, and edit their own work. But they're like-minded people, and there are people who have come into a small, tight-knit organization through both their skill, their love of music, and their willingness to be a team player. Did I answer your question?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Another part of MTV News, I think that was so important, as we mentioned earlier about some of the stories, is the fact that, even though the target audience was a younger audience, I never felt like anybody was talking down to me. Like I didn't feel like the stories, even if you were talking to the bands themselves, there was always really smart conversations that were happening. Can you tell us a little bit about how important that was, like the mission statement behind MTV News?
Sure. So in my initial interview, one of the things that I was told was that in terms of philosophically, our stories and our reporters and our produced pieces aimed up. We spoke up to our audience, not down, maybe even slightly over their head, because music fans are aspirational. Music fans are excited. Music fans want more. The description of our role was we're your hip older brother or older cousin or older friend who knows you, knows what you like, and wants to turn you on to something, but respects you and cares about your fandom. And another thing that was said at the time was, if Entertainment Tonight does it, we don't. I loved that. We would never, for example, call a Grateful Dead fan a deadhead in a piece, because how stupid did we think our audience was? No. We're talking up to the audience. We're sharing the audience like the intelligent music fans we know they are. And if we're turning them on to something, they'll get it. Kurt Loder was 40 years old at the time, never pretended to be young, never pretended to be anything other than what he was. But music fans are passionate and smart and informed and have ears and have eyes. And we just assumed all those things, and it worked. It was exciting as a place to be. Also, as we all know, there are people who are not just 14 years old to 24 years old. There are people who love what those folks are listening to and watching. So it was really about a passion for music culture and a passion for youth culture and for anyone who cared about those things.
Something else that you just said here, like Kurt Loder was older, but he didn't try to talk and speak like, let's say somebody who is significantly younger, you're not trying to, but also you do understand the culture nonetheless. Like, I think one thing I know Jen and we've talking to people about pop culture and politics and news, and some journalists, listen, you can't know everything, but it is important to know what's going on so that you don't sound out of the loop. So you sound current, even if it's not necessarily your generation. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Also, just as a general experience, if you try to sound hip, you make a fool of yourself.
Yeah.
It's just you might pull it off, and there are some people who can and do. I'm not one of them, but if you're interviewing an artist, they'll know right away if you know what you're talking about or not.
Well, I
And
would say even with the kids, just using the word hip, we've lost them already.
yeah. Like, are you tuned in, or do you know what's going on?
Right.
And I have seen, when I would be in a situation where there'd be interviewers from other organizations, including Entertainment Tonight, other media, and you'd hear the questions, and I would just sit and wait those folks out, and the bands would usually, once I'd sit down with them and begin to talk, they would know within 10 or 15 seconds that I was a fan, that I knew what I was talking about, and that I'd come to ask things that they would want their fans to know and to hear, or that would be legitimate questions. Now, the assumption always is the fans are aspirational, the audience is aspirational, they're intelligent. And what's interesting about this and the opportunity for MTV News was to share things that you couldn't get anywhere else. I mean, Rolling Stone magazine existed, and Rolling Stone magazine was brilliant in print. We, didn't want to be Rolling Stone, even though we had Kurt, but in terms of television, we wanted to be the definitive smart source, for fans. And know that we respected our fans, know that we trusted our fans, and know that we, as I mentioned before or another time, we weren't neutral. We were pro music, we were pro music fan, we were pro musician. That was our position. We were for those things, and we thought that came through in our work, and it was legitimate and honest.
Well, speaking of being like pro music, pro fan, etc., you used musicians to for your Choose or Lose campaign to go out and cover some of these campaigns. I mean, I distinctly remember like Dave Mustaine, who I'm pretty sure was the lead singer or still is lead singer of Megadeth, out covering like the RNC and the DNC. And there was something that unique that brought to that experience that you weren't getting from your legacy networks of your ABC or your NBC, where like we're here, we're at the DNC and so speech, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that was exciting. Part of it was we didn't know what we were going to get. I mean, we knew Dave Mustaine, we knew Chuck D from Public Enemy. These were intelligent, well-spoken live wires who were not going to try to be good. They were going to do their thing. They already had to do their thing in front of thousands of people, right? So they were not self-conscious, and they were not trying to impress. They were doing what they did. They're being their true selves, and it was exciting stuff. Did we know what we're going to get? We knew it wouldn't be boring, but what would the content be? Who knows? And certainly for our audience to see those people be where they would like to be and ask questions, and to hear questions that they may want to hear answered, or they would not even, know to ask, was exciting. Dave and Chuck in particular. I forget who else we had do that, but they were outstanding because no one else was going to ask those questions. No one else was going to have the presence in the public space that those two had.
Well, with something like that, I mean, first of all, MTV News, sadly, is no more, but could something like that work again? Because one of the things, first of all, the youth vote has been something that gets discussed a lot. And how do you reach the youth vote? How do you talk to them? This is something that seems to confound a lot of campaigns. And at the same time, young people today, I mean, at least again, I was coming into voting age at this time, but now I feel like the kids now are very clear on what their demands are, what their concerns are, what their issues are, and how they feel like they're not being listened to. Is there a need or a space for something like that again?
Well, there's certainly a space for it. I mean, what makes it tough for any media is how much media there is out there. I mean, back when Bruce Springsteen said there's 500 channels and nothing on, there are thousands and thousands of ways to receive information digitally and on air now. So the audience is more fragmented. This is an old, boring conversation about media today, but it's true. It depends. If you've got someone who is authentic, who is not fearful, who does not pretend, and who can draw a youthful or a youth-minded audience in the first place, absolutely there's a space and opportunity and a need for it. I look and I see, I live in a world where people want to be influencers, where their point is for people to care about them. That is not what we were doing in Choose or Lose. Well, we had people we know that would be cared for, but the point was to put strong personalities who were trusted and believed as authentic out in the world and have them interact. So fans who were comfortable with them, right? Politicians might be comfortable with them, but fans, and even if you weren't a fan of Dave Mustaine, you knew who Dave Mustaine was. And when you saw Dave Mustaine ask a question, you were like, you know what? He doesn't care about being liked. He's being himself. Let's see what this politician says. Let's see what this kid says. Let's see what people say. Yeah, I mean, you see that in politics today. I would say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be an example when she first hit the scene of what that might have looked like. You've got a bartender from the Bronx, all of a sudden out there, well-spoken, highly intelligent, confronting people. Some people liked what she had to say. A lot of people didn't like what she had to say, but it would look something that's just coming to mind, right now.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Like that.
But as you say that, I'm now realizing, I'm like, but then of course with the introduction of social media, because she's done really well with like having her Instagram lives and like taking questions and stuff like that. Anyway.
But I'm throwing her out as an example of a young person from a different walk of life, spoken, courageous, not trying to look good. I mean, not trying to shine the light on her so much, but to be out there and to say things that matter. She just comes to mind.
But also with Choose or Lose and MTV News, you also had access to candidates, which, Bill Clinton being the first to kind of start that and being willing to talk to younger people. And also I would say, like when we mentioned before about Pedro Zamora, like it was interesting. I remember when he passed away that Bill Clinton, back then sitting president, was talking about how Pedro had passed away from AIDS. And to have a president at that point in time in 1994 compared to, let's say, the previous generations of like Reagan, who kind of, put homosexuality, put being gay, or put AIDS as something that, had to be feared. And it really made a big change of how you, I think, brought about cultural change too. It wasn't just words. It was something more of what you did there.
There was the confluence of, let's say, us doing what's now called, or has been called, the new news, getting news from non-traditional sources. We were doing that. And then you had a presidential candidate who just intuitively said, I've got to be places. I'm going to talk to MTV News. I'm going to appear on Arsenio Hall and play sax. I'm going to do things. I'm going to be places that I'm not expected to. That was a very happy meeting, Had the candidate been someone more like Hubert Humphrey from a generation earlier, I don't know how, we would still have done what we did, but certainly Bill Clinton being how he was and his thinking and his campaign, mixed with what we were doing, really was a fortunate, combination. Also, I'd point out, so then you saw 4 years later, people who know history know that George H.W. Bush would not talk to MTV News in 1992. When the polls were going south for him, he agreed late to do an interview with Tabitha Soren on the back of a train. It's been seen. It was not terribly successful. It was too little, too late. I can tell you, having been at George H.W. Bush headquarters on election night, 1992, that all the young Republican volunteers who were working there, they were the waiters, the busboys, the assistants, all came over to talk to MTV News, to talk to me, to express how disappointed they were that their president hadn't agreed to speak on MTV and how Governor Clinton had and how the president should have. The number of young Republicans who felt strongly about that, who wanted to say it personally, they wanted their guy to win. He wasn't going to win, but they wanted to talk to us because they thought that their guy should have too. So 4 years later, and it's the first day of our campaign coverage, I think January 2nd, 1996, Bob Dole gets on the Choose or Lose bus, does an interview with Tabitha Soren, does an online chat with the brand new MTV News Digital, which I'm just starting to get going. So the Republicans learned quickly. But back to 92, we were doing something new. It worked. Bill Clinton was built for it, and he had his own thing, and the twain met.
Of course. But getting into this space, I guess, is like also what I find so fascinating is when MTV literally became a go-to source for
Yeah.
news and a go-to stop for campaigns. Like
Yeah.
I distinctly remember later on, like as the 90s went on, there was a point when I think my dad came into the living room when I was watching MTV, and now he's watching MTV.
Mhm. Yeah. It it happened pretty quickly, and we were serious. And again, our leadership was bold, for sure. The people running, I was a producer and a senior producer, and very happy to get some great assignments. But the people deciding what we were going to do wanted to do new, wanted to do bold, trusted the audience, always trusted the audience. Our on-camera fearless leader, Kurt Loder, Tabitha Soren, who'd hit it out of the park in 92. We had new people coming up. We had Allison Stewart on the air now. John Norris was always solid and fearless and did not care about being judged. He put himself out. So we were there. We were ready. The following year, I went in February of 1993, Tabitha and I went to a Marine base to talk about gays in the military. This is when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was like progress, or would have been. And, we went down there, we spent a week with the Marines. Every Marine on the base had been told, MTV is not your friends. They're supporting homosexuals in the military. That doesn't fit. Meanwhile, every one of these kids with 17, 18, 9-year-olds cannot take their eyes off of us because we're MTV. They've grown up with us. You can see Tabitha from a mile away with her red hair. They all want to talk to us, and they're all trying to talk to us, even they weren't allowed. We go to a gay bar. Our researcher, a brilliant woman named Ann Hartmere, had found the local gay bar and convinced them, the owner, to find gay Marines to talk to us. We'd hide their faces, we'd change their voices, but they could all be thrown out for this. But there we were in February of 1993. This is what MTV News was doing, hiding the identities of gay Marines just off of a base, talking about a real hot button issue that was going into Congress.
So investigative journalism.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic. And because we're MTV, everyone wants to talk rock and roll and the politics. It was exciting.
And also social issues and cultural issues, not being afraid to touch on topics such as racism and LGBT issues. I mean, how important was that? I mean, what was driving that? Like, were the conversations about this is what the youth are telling us, or was it or were the people behind the scenes driving it, seeing what was happening and wanting to get that message out? What kind of explain, I guess, a little bit about
I would say it's a number of things. First of all, if you look at the artists that we're covering, right? Certainly racism in rock and roll and then in rap, there's just, forget it. That there's no space for that. Radio stations like question their blackness. They call themselves black, but we'll see if they'll play this. Public Enemy, right? So it's on the air. The artists are making noise about it on the air. The number of coming out gay artists in huge bands. Everyone knows this. Everyone is seeing this. This is happening within the department. We have gay people in the department. Some were out, some were not. Some were out within the department, but not publicly. So this is the culture. This is who we all were. And it was a very open-minded, challenging space. And at that time, at MTV, or just to be a young person in the late 80s, to want to explore new things just came naturally. And we had a television channel that wanted us to do things with it. So I would say it was the music and the musicians. It was the staff, and of course we had a research department that was going out and did excellent research, who told us what was going on with those kids and that they would be open to this, or that they believed they'd be open to this. We weren't like testing this in markets before we did things, though. I mean, mostly it was have a conversation, talk to a few people, and then shoot from the hip. One of the wonderful things about working at MTV was if you had a bold idea and you could sell it and it fell flat on its face, they would just tell you don't do it again. You didn't get fired for taking a serious creative chance. They had your bags. You may not get to do another, but we took chances.
Okay, so I have like two questions come to mind, but the first one is, so do you see what happened as, in hindsight, I guess this is more of a chicken or an egg thing, meaning was MTV News pushing some of the cultural narratives forward, or was the culture kind of ready and primed and it just needed something like an MTV News to guide them forward in those conversations?
So let's talk about how MTV could influence.
Okay.
We used to talk first. We used to talk about, and if you wanted to cover music, if you wanted to cover a band on tour, if you wanted to shoot things, the worst place you could do that would be in New York, LA, Chicago, Boston, big towns where people are sophisticated, where there's a lot of mixing of culture and information and knowledge going on. You wanted to go to mid-sized and small-sized towns, where our research would tell us the first thing a kid will tell you is nothing happens where I live. Okay. MTV News is playing in these small towns where there are cultural representatives, very few, where maybe no one has ever seen a goth, maybe nobody knows anyone who's gay and out. For a lot of folks, only know white people, only know black people, only know Hispanic people. In those smaller towns, mid-sized and smaller towns, seeing what we had to share and seeing themselves, wait a second, I'm like that, or I know one guy, or I know one girl like that. This is where we were able to push, you know, and share information. I don't think we were turning kids on in Los Angeles or Boston or New York onto that much. That we were, compared to like Lake George, Louisiana. These were, this is where, and I can tell you as a producer, walking around, I'd take out the microphone and the mic cube would appear. The moment they saw it was MTV, kids just run over, and forget the story. They wanted to ask about why you're playing so many Madonna videos. MTV sucks. Great people to talk to. They just wanted to talk because they knew you. I am MTV. They felt they knew what that camera crew was, unlike every other television news organization anywhere. Us, they knew, and they knew we knew them. So we were able to push, I think, in medium and smaller towns, information that no one's getting anywhere else. How did you ask the other half of that question? Were we responding? Of course we were responding. We didn't create any of this, but we had a really broad, diverse set of human beings in the department, in all of MTV. We're listening, we're looking. This is what we did for a living. You really, if you had to have your ears and eyes tuned for something that was different, and say, what is this about? And let's go take a look.
Okay. The other question I had was how much, I'm trying to think. A lot of the times when you're describing what the process was when it comes to how you chose stories, how you shot stories, how you were just sort of open to whatever was going to happen, how much is the creative aspect important to the stories that you guys were able to find and the way that you told those stories?
Well,
to think outside the box.
Sure. Well, first of all, if you were television, I began as a freelancer for several years. As a producer, you've got lots of unusual ideas, offbeat ideas, things you'd like to try. Every company out there says they want new ideas, but in the end, every company out there wants to cover their ass and do what they've done before. At MTV, you could actually try stuff on air. I remember going into a script meeting once with my boss. I'm saying, here are all my sound bites. I'm not telling you the order I'm putting them in. I just kind of want to make it up in the edit room as I go along. Okay. So the environment there welcomed freshness, welcomed offbeat. And as I said earlier, if it didn't work, if it really didn't work, they'd send you back to the edit room and you'd have to recut. But we were supposed to be fresh. We were supposed to be new. We were supposed to be different. Also, we edited all of our news stories to music. And we had, in these days, the copyright rules relative to music and the contracts that MTV had with every piece of music that we had a music video for were such that we could do whatever we wanted, without legal concern. So, and we're all music people. This isn't just random journalists, I get to play with a record now. We're all music crazed to begin with. You're not working there otherwise. You're doing something else for more money and more prominence. We're there because we're music people. So just being able to sit, you write your script and thinking about how you want to score it and what's going to happen and how this works with the music. It was a far more involved process. Then you get into the edit room with a person who does nothing all day but make MTV television. And this person is charged with keeping it fresh, right? This is his or her job is to keep the look moving, keep the look moving, keep the look moving. And so this is where you're going with the script you've written that you've gotten approved in an environment where you're welcome to try stuff out. So the answer to your question is being creative. That was table stakes. Table stakes. Boring. Thou shalt not be boring. You cannot be boring. You cannot be tired. You couldn't have simple exposition in a script. Well, I have to explain this now. That's pretty damn dull. You got to come up with an idea for it.
Okay, one final question then for all of this, because again, different shops are going to have different rules, different guidelines, different things they're looking for. But to, let's say, a young journalist who's starting out, because all the shops right now are also trying to make sure that they attract and catch that next generation of reader, viewer, whatever. Mm-hmm. Is there an aspect of MTV News that you could be like, listen, you can't do it all the same way that we did, because that was a different time, different world. But is there like I feel like there's a nugget or something that you could take away from this to be like, but this you can carry forward with you?
I want to say two things. So when I think in my early days, which in some respects were the most fun because I was just getting paid to play, I was one of several producers. We did not all produce in the same style. We did not all write in the same style. We were a chorus of voices. There were very different styles and approaches. The writers, there were different styles of writing. So there was room for the chorus, many different types. How do you break through? How do you fit in? The first thing I would say, and this is old, is you need to be a good writer. I have been in places where people assume that you can learn to be a really strong writer. You got to work hard at that. And I would also say, frankly, some talent is necessary. There's some things you cannot teach. If you have no talent as a writer, this would never have been a place for you. You've got to have a gift for words, whether that's the written word. For me, it was the spoken word. I'm not a text writer. I'm a spoken writer. And you have to bring some talent. You have to stand out. You have to be different, particularly now. Otherwise, who cares? I think that also, I haven't really touched on this. Our journalism standards were the same as everyone else. Like, do you have it? Is this confirmed? Do we know what we're talking about? Are we being responsible? That just was necessary. And that was the managing editors and the copy editors just made sure that stuff got taken care of. Trying to break through now, I think you've got to have a voice, you have got to have some vision, and you've got to have, if not fresh ideas, be faster and than everyone else. Get things done quickly. Be dependable, and speed, talent, and an open mind.
Dom, that was an amazing conversation with Michael.
It really was. He's a fountain of information. That guy.
It's so much, and there's so much more that we wanted to ask and we had to learn from him. And actually, there's so much more he had to say, right?
Yeah. Talking about digital archiving, journalists protecting their information. So, yeah, we ended up going longer and, we'll be bringing this to our listeners in a future episode.
There you go. So look out for that. Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia. Music provided by Jay Cowett. Research by Lori Ruthenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.